Chapter 6. Beyonder. Where am I? What do I plan to do here? I would like to know, too. Calming himself down, Joe Mingru silently repeated the questions posed by the two. What left the deepest impression on him were neither the sentences formed by words nor the meanings behind them, but the display of bewilderment, vigilance, panic, and reverence by the couple. For some baffling reason, two people had been mysteriously dragged into this world, surrounded by gray fog. As the perpetrator, Joe Mingru was already feeling abnormally dumbfounded and startled, let alone the couple who was pulled into this mess completely passively. For them, such events and encounters might already be beyond their imaginations, right? Momentarily, Joe Mingru thought of two options. The first option was feigning victimhood to hide his true identity and, in turn, gain a considerable amount of trust. He could then take a wait-and-see approach and take advantage of his circumstances where necessary. The other option was to maintain his mysterious identity in the eyes of the couple. He could then affect the subsequent development while gleaning valuable information from them. Without the luxury of time to deliberate over the situation, he grasped hold of the thought that flashed across his mind. He made an immediate decision to try out the second idea. Exploit the psychological state of the others to gain the greatest advantage for himself. After a few seconds of silence in the fog, Joe Mingru chuckled. With a low but not heavy tone, he calmly spoke as though he was replying to the polite greetings from the visitors. An attempt. An attempt. An attempt? Audrey Hall looked at the mysterious guy veiled in the grayish-white fog, and the only thought was that whatever was happening was absurd, funny, horrifying, and weird. She was at the dressing table inside her bedroom only moments ago, but just by turning around, she had come into this place that was filled with gray fog. How inconceivable. Audrey took a breath, revealing an impeccable, courteous smile. She asked in a somewhat perturbed way, "Sir, is the attempt over? Might you permit our return?" Algar Wilson also had the intentions to probe Joe Mingru in a similar fashion, but his rich experience made him statelier. He held back his impulse and only took on the role of a silent onlooker. Joe Mingru looked at the questioner. Looking through the hazy mist, he could roughly see the silhouette of the person in question. It was a tall girl with smooth blonde hair, but her exact countenance could not be seen clearly. He did not rush to reply the girl's question, but turned around to look at the man. He had messy dark blue hair as well as a medium stature that was not considered stout. Joe Mingru suddenly realized something. Once he became stronger or had a deeper understanding of the foggy world, perhaps it was possible for him to see through the fog and discern the girl and the man. In this situation, they are the visitors, and I'm the master. After changing his mindset, Joe Mingru instantly noticed details that he had neglected earlier on. The girl with a melodious voice and the mature, withdrawn man both looked considerably incorporeal. Tainted by a faint crimson red, they resembled a projected image of the two crimson-red stars beyond the gray fog. This projection was based on the connection between the crimson red and himself, an intangible connection that only he himself could realistically grasp hold of. The projection would disappear once the connection was cut, and the couple would then return. Joe Mingru nodded mildly and looked at the blonde, chuckling. "Of course, if you make a formal request, you can return this very moment." When she did not identify any ill intention from his tone, Audrey heaved a sigh of relief. She believed that since a gentleman who was capable of such miraculous things had given his word, he would definitely abide by it stringently. With her mind somewhat mollified, she surprisingly was in no hurry to request her leave. She rolled her virid eyes left and right, which sparkled with an abnormal radiance. She said in an anxious, anticipative, and tempted manner, "This is such a wonderful experience. Yes, I have always been hoping that something like this would happen. I mean, I like mysteries and supernatural miracles. No, my point is, what I mean is that, sir, what can I do to become a beyonder?" She got more excited as she spoke, so much so she was fumbling over her words. The dream that sprouted in her as a result of listening to thrilling fantasies, as told by her elders, finally saw the possibility of being materialized. However, with just a few words, she had already forgotten all her previous fears and horrors. "Good question. I would also like to know the answer," Joe Mingru complained inwardly. He started to ponder on an answer to the question to maintain his unfathomable image. At the same time, he felt that it was quite unbecoming of him to talk while standing. Shouldn't he be in a palace, sitting at the head of a long table and on a mysterious high-back chair engraved with ancient patterns, while silently observing his visitors? As soon as this thought surfaced, the gray fog started to churn, giving both Audrey and Algar a shock. In an instant, they saw a number of towering stone pillars around them. Above them was a vast dome that encapsulated them. This entire edifice looked magnificent, grand and lofty, just like a legendary palace for giants. Directly under the dome where the gray fog gathered, a long bronze table appeared with 10 high-back chairs on either side in a symmetrical arrangement. The back of each chair dazzled and shone faintly with crimson red, drawing the outlines of weird constellations that differed from reality. Audrey and Algar sat face to face, sitting next to the seat of honor. The girl looked to her sides and could not help but mumble, "How fascinating." "It is certainly fascinating." Joe Mingru extended his right hand and caressed the edge of the bronze table a little while, maintaining an unperturbed expression. Algar inspected the surroundings, and after a few seconds of silence, he suddenly opened his mouth and answered Audrey's question in place of Joe Mingru. "Are you a Loan? If you want to become a Beyonder, join the churches of either the Evernight Goddess, the Lord of Storms, or the God of Steam and Machinery. The majority of us will not meet a Beyonder our entire lives. This has caused churches, and even some clergies within some of the biggest churches, to suspect the same. While this is the case, I am certain to tell you that Beyonders still exist in courts, tribunals, and execution agencies. They are still fighting against the dangers that grow in the dark, only that their numbers are much fewer as compared to before and during the early days of the Iron Age." Joe Mingru listened attentively, but he tried his best to present himself as paying little attention to Algar's words, much like how young kids listen to stories. Relying on Klein's fragmented general knowledge of history, Joe Mingru knew clearly that the Iron Age referred to the current epoch, which was the 5th epoch that began 1349 years ago. Audrey silently listened to Algar finish his sentence before sighing. "Mister, I know all about what you just said. I even know more than that, including the Nighthawks, the mandated Punisher, and the machinery hive mind. But I don't want to lose my freedom." Algar gave a low-sounding laugh and said vaguely, "You can't become a Beyonder without sacrifices. If you don't consider joining churches and accepting their given challenges, you can only seek the royal families and the few nobles with family histories of more than 1,000 years. If not, you can rely on your luck to search for clandestine evil organizations." Audrey puffed her cheeks subconsciously and looked around in a fluster. After confirming that both the mysterious man and Audrey did not notice her tick, she pressed, "Are there no other solutions?" Algar sank into silence. About half a minute later, he turned around to look at the mysterious man, who was watching the two of them in silence. Realizing that Joe Mingru had no plans to make any comment, he looked back at Audrey and said with deliberation, "I have 2 sets of Sequence 9 potion formulas." "Sequence 9? Joe Mingru muttered to himself. "Really? Which 2 sets?" Audrey clearly knew what the Sequence 9 potion formulas meant. Algar leaned back slightly and replied unhurriedly, "As you know, humanity can only depend on potions to become real Beyonders, while the names of potions come from the blasphemy slate. After constant translations into Jotun 1, Elvish, Ancient and Modern Hermes, and Ancient Faac, they have undergone changes to match the day and age of that era. The essence is not in their names, but whether they portray the core characteristics of the potions. I have a Sequence 9 potion named Sailor. It enables you to have excellent balancing capabilities. Even if you were on a boat in a rainstorm, you will be able to walk about freely as though you were on land. You will also gain immense strength and illusory scales under your skin. They will enable you to swim like a fish and be difficult to catch. You will move agilely underwater just like marine animals. Even without any equipment, you will be able to easily submerge underwater for at least 10 minutes. Sounds great. The Keepers of the Seas from the Lord of Storms? It was called by that name in the past. Algar did not pause and continued. The second set of Sequence 9 potions is called Spectator, although I am not sure what it was called in the past. This set of potions enables you to have an exceptionally sharp mind with acute observational abilities. I believe you can understand by what spectator means from watching operas and plays. Just like an audience, spectators judge the actors in the secular world, catching a glimpse of the real thoughts of them through their emotions, conduct, and mantras. At this point, Algar emphasized, "You must remember, regardless of whether you are at an extravagant banquet or a crowded street, spectators can only be spectators forever." Audrey's eyes shone as she listened and spoke after a long while. "Why? All right. This is a follow-up question. I think I have fallen in love with this feeling of being a spectator. How can I get this potion's formula? What can I use to trade with you for it?" Algar looked like he was already prepared, as he said in a deep voice, "The blood of ghost sharks, at least 100 milliliters of it." Audrey nodded her head excitedly, but subsequently asked worriedly, "If I can get it? And I'm saying how do I hand it to you? How can you promise me that you can give the potion's formula to me in return for the ghost shark's blood, as well as the authenticity of the formula?" Algar said calmly. "I'll give you an address. I'll mail the formula to you or tell you directly here once I receive the blood of the ghost shark. As for promises, I think that both you and I can feel rest assured under the witness of the mysterious Sir." As he said this, he swept his eyes towards Joe Mingru, who was sitting up straight at the seat of honor. "Sir, the fact that you brought us here shows that you have tremendous strength unimaginable to us. Neither one of us would dare violate a promise with you as witness." "That's right." Audrey's eyes sparkled and agreed with excitement. From her perspective, the mysterious gentleman who had unimaginable abilities was definitely an authoritative witness. How could I or the guy opposite me dare trick him? Audrey half turned her body and looked at Joe Mingru earnestly. "Sir, please be the witness of our trade." At that moment, she then realized that she was all too impolite, having forgotten all along to ask a particular question. She asked hurriedly, "Sir, how should we address you?" Algar nodded slightly and echoed the same question in a serious manner. "Sir, how should we address you?" Joe Mingru was taken aback. He gently rapped his fingers on the bronze table. The contents of the earlier divination flashed across his mind suddenly. He leaned back, withdrew his right hand, and crossed his 10 fingers, placing them below his chin. He gave the duo a faint smile. "You can address me as—" Upon saying this, he paused for a moment. He said amiably and calmly, "The Fool." Chapter 7. Call Sign. "You can address me as the Fool." The simple answer soon emanated through the grand hall and dissipated into the fog. However, the voice kept resonating in Audrey's and Algar's hearts, stirring up one ripple after another. They never expected such a designation, but they felt that he was deserving of it. The designation perfectly embodied his image as someone mysterious, powerful, and bizarre. After a few seconds of silence, Audrey stood up, held up her skirt slightly, and bent her knees, curtsying to Joe Mingru. "Honorable Mr. Fool, would you please permit me to take the liberty of requesting you to be the witness of our trade?" "It's nothing." Joe Mingru's mind whirred as he answered in a way that matched his status. "It's our honor, Mr. Fool." Algar stood up as well. He bent his back slightly with his right palm over his chest. Joe Mingru lowered his right palm and smiled. "Continue. The both of you." Algar nodded and sat back down before looking at Audrey. "If you can obtain the ghost shark's blood, get someone to send it to the Warrior and Sea Bar at Pelican Street in the White Rose Borough of Pritz Harbor. Tell the boss, Williams, that it's what the captain wants. Once I acknowledge receipt, will you be giving me an address to mail the potion formula to, or do you want me to tell it to you here directly?" Audrey thought for a moment before saying with a smile, I will choose the more secure method. Let's do it here, although it's a test of my memory. Since Mr. Fool had agreed to bear witness for the trade, it also represented that there would be a similar gathering the next time. With this in mind, she suddenly turned her head as she looked at Joe Mingru with sparkling eyes. With a tone of interest, she suggested, Mr. Fool, would you mind making a few more attempts like this? Algar listened to her suggestion calmly. He was tempted by the suggestion as well. He hurriedly echoed, Mr. Fool, don't you find such gatherings interesting? Although your powers exceed our imaginations, there has to be certain domains that you don't understand or excel in. The person across me is obviously a young lady of lofty stature. I also have my unique set of experiences, insights, mediums, and resources. Perhaps there will come a day when both of us can help you complete something trivial that might be inconvenient for you. From his point of view, the fact that he had been pulled into this space without any warning or any means to resist meant that the mysterious Mr. Fool was in control. Participating in the gatherings was not necessarily something he could refuse. Therefore, it was better to reap the benefits of this encounter as much as he could to make up for his passive and disadvantaged state. The trio at the long table had different backgrounds, resources, information channels, and comprehension of the mystical domain. If they interacted and enjoyed some limited cooperation, they could produce unpredictable and immeasurable effects. The resource trade that had just been negotiated was one example. Another example would be if he wished to kill someone. He could easily request the gathering's members who did not appear to be related to him both on the surface and in reality for help. He could perfectly misdirect any investigators, a young lady of lofty stature. Was my behavior and accent that obvious? Audrey stared blankly, mouth slightly agape, but she soon jolted back to her senses and nodded her head without any hesitation. Mr. Fool, I think it's a very good suggestion. As long as this gathering becomes regular, you can totally leave certain things that are inconvenient for you to us. Of course, it has to be something within our capacities. From the moment he heard the suggestion, Joe Mingru was already weighing the pros and cons. More gatherings definitely allowed him to gain more knowledge of the secrets of the Beyonders or other mysteries, a boon for his transmigration back. For example, it was likely that the potion formula would appear at the next gathering because of the spectators. Similarly, the information he gained was bound to be helpful for his present life. However, more gatherings meant it was easier to expose himself. Indeed, regardless of the world, there is no such thing as a free lunch. Joe Mingru extended his right hand again as he rapped the side of the long table with his finger gently. Considering the fact that he was in control of the gathering's summoning and dismissal, any threat of exposure was within the confines of his control. The pros clearly exceeded the cons, so Joe Mingru rapidly made a decision. He stopped his rapping as he smiled at the anticipative and perturbed gazes of the duo. I'm a person who likes a fair and equal exchange. Your help will not go unrewarded. Every Monday at 3 in the afternoon, try your best to be alone. After I make a few more attempts and figure out certain things, perhaps you can apply for a leave of absence ahead of time. You will no longer need to worry about being in inappropriate situations. This was a form of agreement to Algar's and Audrey's suggestions. Audrey had just turned 17. Having been taken care of her entire life, she had the character of a young girl. Therefore, she could not help but clench her fist and gradually pump it in front of her chest when she heard the fool's reply. Without waiting for Algar to say a word, Audrey said in excitement, her eyes glowing, Then, shall we give ourselves call signs? After all, we can't use our real names for conversation. Although I might not be able to deceive Mr. Fool regarding my true identity, the person opposite me poses some danger. I must not let him know who I am. Good idea, answered Joe Mingru in a simple and relaxed manner. Audrey's mind immediately began whirring as she aired her thoughts as they came to her. You are Mr. Fool, which is derived from tarot cards. Then, as a fixed, long-term, and secretive gathering, we should be uniform in our designations. Yes, I'll also choose one from the tarot cards. Her tone slowly turned joyous. I've decided. My designation shall be Justice. It was one of the 22 major arcana tarot cards. What about you, mister? Audrey cheekily smiled at her partner sitting across her. Algar frowned slightly before relaxing it immediately. The Hanged Man. It was another major arcana card. All right, then we can be considered as the founding members of the Tarot Club. Audrey was the first to blurt it out happily, only to look fearfully at the fog-concealed Joe Mingru. Will that be all right, Mr. Fool? Joe Mingru shook his head in amusement. You can decide on such trivial matters by yourselves. Thank you. Audrey was clearly thrilled. Following that, she looked at Algar. Mr. Hanged Man, can you repeat the address again once more? I'm afraid that my memories will fail me. No problem. Algar was very pleased with Audrey's seriousness as he repeated the address once more. After repeating it to herself silently thrice, Audrey said again in excitement, I heard that tarot cards were invented by Emperor Roselle as a game. In fact, doesn't it come equipped with the power to divine the future? No. Most of the time, divination stems from oneself. Everyone has something spiritual about themselves, allowing them to attune to the spiritual world and connect to information about themselves at an even higher level. However, ordinary folks are unable to notice this, much less be able to interpret the signs they receive. This information will present itself with the help of divination tools. Let me raise a simple example: dreams and dream interpreters. Algar took a glance at Joe Mingru and, seeing no response from him, he refuted Audrey's claim. Tarot cards are, in fact, such a tool. It uses more symbolism and more logical elements to help us in conveniently and accurately interpreting the signs. Although Joe Mingru appeared indifferent, he was actually listening very carefully. It was only at this point that his empty mind slowly became heavy as his head began to feel a throbbing pain. Got it. Audrey nodded in agreement. Following that, she emphasized, That's not what I meant. I'm not doubting the tarot cards, but I heard that Emperor Roselle had actually created another set of cards, secret and mysterious ones. They were paper cards which symbolized a particular unknown power. There was a total of 22 cards that he completed. Later on in life, he referenced them to create the 22 major arcana tarot cards, which are used as a gaming tool. Was what I said correct? She looked at Joe Mingru as though she was attempting to get an answer from the mysterious Mr. Fool. All Joe Mingru did was smile without saying a word. He cast his gaze at the Hanged Man as though he was putting him to the test. Algar subconsciously straightened his back and said in a deep voice, That's right. It is said that Emperor Roselle had seen the blasphemy slate, and that set of paper cards contained the profound mysteries of the 22 paths of the divine. 22 paths of the divine, repeated Audrey with a longing tone. At that moment, Joe Mingru's headache intensified. He felt that his invisible connection with the crimson stars and grayish-white fog was beginning to falter. All right, that will be all for today's gathering, he said in a deep voice, after making the decision immediately. By your will. Algar bowed his head respectfully. By your will. Audrey mimicked the Hanged Man. She still had many questions and thoughts. Thus, she was unwilling to have it end so soon. As Joe Mingru severed the connection, he said with a smile, Let us look forward to the next gathering. The stars brightened once more as the crimson light receded like water. Just as Audrey and Algar heard Mr. Fool's words, their figures turned into a blur as they phased away. In a second, the projection shattered as the gray fog restored its silence. As for Joe Mingru, he felt himself turning heavy rapidly. His surroundings turned fleeting as his eyes met darkness before changing into dazzling sunlight. He was still standing in the middle of his apartment. It was like a dream. What the heck was that foggy world? Who or what sort of power created the changes that just happened? Joe Mingru sighed softly. He was completely puzzled as he walked towards the study desk as though his legs were filled with lead. He picked up the pocket watch he placed outside to determine how much time had passed. Time flowed at the same pace. Joe Mingru made a rough judgment. After putting down his pocket watch, he found himself unable to endure the splitting headache any further. He sat on the chair and lowered his head, using his left thumb and middle finger to massage his temples. After a long while, he suddenly let out a sigh and said in Mandarin, "From the looks of it, I won't be able to return anytime soon." Only the clueless could be fearless. After witnessing such a fascinating event and learning the situation regarding beyonders and the mysterious world, Joe Mingru no longer dared to rashly try the luck enhancement ritual using ancient Faac or Loan language. Who knew what other kinds of situation would happen? Perhaps it would be more bizarre, horrifying, or even a living hell. At the very least, I should attempt only when I have a deep mastery of mysticism, thought Joe Mingru helplessly. Thankfully, the so-called gathering could provide him with help. After another bout of silence, he muttered to himself with a tone of dismay, disappointment, agony, and grief. "From this moment forth, I'm Klein." Klein tried his best to refocus his solutions and plans so as to purge the negative emotions in him. Perhaps he could learn the potion formula for spectator from the side. The gathering that just happened sure is fascinating. People who reside in different places across the world can reduce hundreds of kilometers to just mere inches and discuss face-to-face while supplying each other's needs. Speaking of which, this does sound a little familiar. Klein was stunned for a few seconds before he burst out in laughter. Pressing against his temple, he jested under his breath. Wasn't that a social networking platform? Chapter 8. A New Era. Howling wind accompanied a downpour. The three-mast sailboat was tossed around by the crests and troughs of the incoming waves, as if it was being towed by a giant. The crimson glow in Algar Wilson's eyes faded. He found himself still remaining on the deck, and nothing appeared to have changed. Almost immediately, the quirky-shaped glass bottle in his palm shattered, and the frost within melted into the rain. In seconds, there were no longer any traces left that suggested the existence of the wondrous antique. A hexagonal crystal-like snowflake emerged on Algar's palm. It then faded rapidly until it was seemingly absorbed by the flesh, vanishing completely in the process. Algar nodded his head in a hardly noticeable manner, as if he was thinking about something. He remained still and silent for a full 5 minutes. He turned around and headed for the cabin. As he was about to enter, a man who wore a similar robe embroidered with lightning patterns emerged from inside. This man, who had soft blonde hair, paused and looked at Algar. He held his right fist to his chest and said, "May the storm be with you." Algar replied with the same words and gesture. There were no emotions on his rough face, which had a well-defined structure. Algar entered the cabin after the greeting and proceeded to the captain's cabin situated at the far end of the corridor. Surprisingly, he did not encounter any sailors on the way. The whole place was as quiet as a graveyard. Behind the door to the captain's cabin, a soft brown carpet overlaid the floor. A bookshelf and a wine rack took the opposite side walls of the room. The books with their yellowish covers and wine bottles with their dark red color looked peculiar under the flickering candlelight. On the desk with the candle there was a bottle of ink, a quill, a pair of black metallic telescope, and a sextant made of brass. Behind the desk sat a pale, middle-aged man wearing a captain's hat which had a skull on it. As Algar approached him, he said menacingly, "I will not give in." "I believe you can do it," Algar said calmly, so calm that it felt like he was commenting on the weather. "You—" The man seemed to be stunned by the unexpected answer. At this very moment, Algar leaned forward slightly and suddenly dashed across the room until they were only separated by the desk. "Pa!" Algar tightened his shoulder and reached out his right hand to choke the man. Illusory fish scales appeared on the back of his hand as he crazily mustered more strength to choke the man, giving him no time to respond. Crack! Amid the crisp cracking sound, the man's eyes widened as his body was lifted up. His legs twitched furiously before they soon became motionless. His pupils began to widen as he stared aimlessly. There was a stench from between his legs as his pants gradually turned moist. While lifting the man, Algar lowered his back and strode toward the wall. Bang! He used the man as a shield and smashed forward at the wall. His extremely muscular arm was monstrous. A hole cracked open in the wooden wall and rain poured in, accompanied by the scent of the ocean. Algar flung the man out of the cabin, straight into the giant waves that resembled mountains. The wind continued to howl in the dark as almighty nature devoured everything. Algar took out a white handkerchief and wiped his right hand carefully before throwing it into the sea as well. He stepped back and waited patiently for company. In less than 10 seconds, the blond man from before rushed in and asked, "What happened?" "The captain has escaped," Algar answered in an annoyed manner as he panted. "I didn't know he still had some of his beyonder powers." "Damn it!" The blond man cursed softly. He went up to the opening and stared into the distance. However, nothing was visible except for the waves and the rain. "Forget it. He was just extra loot," the blond man said, waving his arm. "We will still be rewarded for finding this ghost ship from the Tudor era." Even if he was a keeper of the sea, he would not have hastily dived into the sea under this weather condition. "The captain will not be able to survive much longer if the storm continues," Algar said, as he nodded in approval. The wooden wall was repairing itself at a discernible rate. He gazed at the wall and turned his head subconsciously towards the rudder and the sail. He was perfectly aware of what was going on behind all the wooden planks. The chief mate, the second mate, the crew, and the sailors were not present. There was no living person on board. Amidst all the emptiness, the rudder and the sail moved eerily by themselves. Algar again pictured the fool, who was covered in grayish-white fog, and sighed. He turned back and looked outside at the mighty waves and spoke as though in a reverie, while filled with anticipation and awe. "A new era has begun. Empress Borough, Backland, capital of the Lowen Kingdom." Audrey Hall pinched her cheeks in disbelief of her encounter a while ago. On the dressing table in front of her, the old bronze mirror had shattered into pieces. Audrey cast her gaze downwards and saw the swirling crimson on the back of her hand. It was like a tattoo depicting a star. The crimson gradually faded and disappeared into her skin. Only at this point in time was Audrey certain that it was not a dream. Her eyes twinkled as she grinned. She could not help but stand up before bending down to lift up the hem of her dress. She curtsied towards thin air and started dancing lively. It was the ancient elf dance, the most popular dance among royalty at the moment. She had a bright smile on her face as she moved about gracefully. "Knock! Knock!" Someone suddenly knocked at her bedroom door. "Who is it?" Audrey immediately stopped her dance and asked as she tidied her dress to look more elegant. "My lady, may I come in?" "You should start to prepare for the ceremony," Audrey's maidservant asked from outside the door. Audrey looked into a mirror on the dressing table and quickly wiped the smile from her face, leaving only a tiny hint of a smile. She responded gently after she had ensured everything was presentable. "Come in." The doorknob turned, and Annie, her maidservant, pushed in. "Oh, it cracked," Annie said as she instantly saw the outcome of the old bronze mirror. Audrey blinked and said slowly, Yes. Susie was here just now. I am sure you know she likes to wreak havoc." Susie was a golden retriever that was not so much of a purebred. It was a gift given to her father, Count Hall, when he bought a foxhound. Nevertheless, Audrey adored it. "You should train it well," Annie said as she picked up the pieces of the bronze mirror adeptly and with care, lest it hurt her mistress. As she finished tidying up, she asked Audrey with a smile, "Which dress do you want to put on?" Audrey thought for a while and answered, "I like the dress designed by Mrs. Gwinnett for my 17th birthday." "No. You can't wear the same dress twice to a formal ceremony or others will gossip about and question the Hall family's financial ability," Annie said, shaking her head in disagreement. "But I really like it," Audrey insisted in a gentle manner. "You can wear it at home or when you attend an event that isn't so formal," Annie said firmly, suggesting that it was not negotiable. "Then it will have to be the one with the lotus design along the sleeves given by Mr. Sades 2 days ago," Audrey said, as she drew in a gasp inconspicuously, maintaining her sweet smile. "You always have such a good taste," Annie said as she stepped back and shouted towards the door. "The 6th dressing room! Ah, forget it! I shall fetch it myself." Maidservants began to work. The dress, accessories, footwear, hat, makeup, and hairstyle. Everything had to be taken care of. When it was almost ready, Count Hall appeared at the door wearing a dark brown waistcoat. He had a hat sharing the same color as his clothes and a nice mustache. His blue eyes were filled with joy, but his loosening muscles, widening waist, and wrinkles were obviously destroying his handsome youth. "The brightest jewel of Backlund, it is time for our departure," Count Hall said, knocking at the door twice. "Father, stop calling me that," Audrey protested as she got up with the help of the maidservants. "Well then, it's time to set off, my beautiful little princess," Count Hall said, as he bent his left arm, signaling Audrey to hold his arm. Audrey shook her head slightly and said, "That is for my mother, Mrs. Hall, the Countess." "Then this side." Count Hall bent his right arm with a smile and said, "This is for you, my greatest pride." The Royal Navy Base, Pritz Harbor, Oak Island. When Audrey took her father's arm and walked down the carriage, she was suddenly shocked by the juggernaut in front of her. In the military port not far away, there was a huge ship shimmering with metallic reflections. It did not have a sail, leaving only an observatory deck, 2 towering chimneys, and 2 turrets at the ends of the ship. It was so majestic and large that the fleet of sails nearby were like newborn dwarfs clustering around a giant. "Holy Lord of Storms! Oh, my lord! An ironclad warship!" Amidst the furor, Audrey was also shocked by this unprecedented miracle created by mankind. It was an ocean miracle that had never been seen before. It took a while for the aristocrats, ministers, and members of parliament to compose themselves. Then, a black spot on the sky started to grow in size until it occupied 1/3 of the sky and entered everyone's view. The atmosphere suddenly became solemn. It was a gigantic flying machine with a beautiful streamlined design hovering in midair. The deep blue machine had airbags made of cotton, which were supported by alloy structures that were strong but light. The alloy structure's bottom had openings mounted with machine guns, projectile launchers, and muzzles. The exaggerated humming noise from the ignition steam engine and the tail blades produced a symphony that left everyone amazed. The king's family arrived on their airship, exuding a lofty and indisputable authority. 2 swords, each with a ruby crown at the handle, were pointing vertically down and reflected the sunlight on both sides of the cabin. They were the Sword of Judgment emblem, which symbolized the Augustus family and has been passed down from the previous epoch. Audrey was not yet 18, so she had not attended the introductory ceremony, which was an event led by the Empress that marked one's debut into the Backlund social scene to announce her adult status. Therefore, she could not be nearer to the airship and had to remain silent at the back to watch the entire event. Nevertheless, it did not matter to her. In fact, she was relieved that she did not need to deal with the princes. The miracle that mankind used to conquer the sky touched down gently. The first ones to step down the stairs were the handsome young guards who wore red ceremonial uniforms with white trousers. Decorated with medals, they formed 2 lines with rifles in hand. They were awaiting the appearances of King George III, his queen, and the prince and princess. Audrey was not new to meeting important people, so she showed no interest at all. Instead, she had her attention on the 2 statue-like black-armored cavalry flanking the king. In this era of iron, steam, and cannons, it was surprising that there was still someone who could bear wearing full armor. The cold metallic luster and the dull black helmet conveyed solemnity and authority. Could they be the higher-order disciplinary paladins? Audrey recalled snippets of a casual conversation among adults. She was curious, but did not dare go close. The ceremony commenced with the arrival of the king's family. The incumbent prime minister, Lord Aguesid Negon, went up to the front. He was a member of the Conservative Party and the second non-aristocrat to become the prime minister till this very day. He was given the title of a lord for his great contributions. Of course, Audrey knew more. The main supporter of the Conservative Party was the present Duke of Negan, Palace Negan, who was the brother of Aguesid. Aguesid was a slender and almost bald 50-plus-year-old man with a sharp gaze. He surveyed the area before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe you have witnessed this history-making ironclad warship. It has dimensions of 101 by 21 meters. It has an amazing port and starboard design. The armor belt is 457 millimeters thick. The displacement is 1,060 tons. There are 4 305mm main cannons, 6 rapid-fire cannons, 12 6-pound cannons, 18 6-barrel machine guns, and 4 torpedo launchers. It can reach a speed of 16 knots. It will be the real hegemon. It will conquer the seas. The crowd was roused. The mere descriptions were enough to instill fearful images in them, let alone the fact that the actual thing was right in front of them. Aguesid smiled and spoke a few more lines before saluting the king and requested, "Your Majesty, please give it a name. Since it will set sail from Pritz Harbor, it should be named the Pritz," George III responded. His expression showed his delight. "The Pritz! The Pritz!" The words spread from the Navy Minister and the Admiral of the Royal Navy to all the soldiers and officers on the deck. They all exclaimed in unison, "The Pritz!" George III ordered the Pritz to set sail for a trial in the midst of the gun salutes and the celebratory atmosphere. Honk! Thick smoke spewed out from the chimneys. The sound from the machinery could be heard faintly beneath the sound of the ship horn. The juggernaut departed from the harbor. Everyone was shocked when the 2 main cannons at the ship's bow fired at an uninhabited island in its path. Boom! 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 The ground shook as dust shot up into the sky. Shock waves spread out, producing waves in the sea. Satisfied, Aguesid turned back to the crowd and announced, "From this day on, doomsday will fall on the 7 pirates who call themselves admirals and the 4 who call themselves kings. They can only shiver in fear. It is the end of their era. Only the ironclad warship will roam the seas, no matter whether the pirates have the powers of the Beyonders, ghost ships, or cursed ships." Aguesid's chief secretary deliberately asked, "Can't they build their own ironclad warships?" Some of the nobles and members of Parliament nodded, feeling that such a possibility could not be eliminated. Aguesid immediately smiled and shook his head slowly as he answered, "Impossible. It will never be possible. Building our ironclad warship required 3 big coal and steel amalgamators, a scale of more than 20 steel factories, 60 scientists, and senior engineers from the Backlund Cannon Academy and Pritz Nautical Academy, 2 royal shipyards, almost 100 factories for spare parts, an admiralty, a shipbuilding committee, a cabinet, a determined king with excellent foresight, and a great country with an annual steel production of 12 million tons. The pirates will never achieve it." Having said that, he paused and raised his arms before shouting in agitation, "Ladies and gentlemen, the era of cannons and warships has dawned upon us." Chapter 9. The Notebook. After half an hour of rest, Joe Mingru, who now viewed himself as Klein, finally recovered. In the meantime, he found that there were now 4 black dots on the back of his hand, which happened to form a small square. These 4 black spots faded and disappeared quickly, but Klein knew that they were still hiding in his body, waiting to be awakened. 4 spots forming a square. Is it in correspondence with the 4 pieces of staple food at the 4 corners of the room? Does this mean that in the future, I don't need to prepare the food and can do the ritual and chants immediately? Klein made a guess. This might seem good, but the emergence of the spots was ominous, and things that one lacked understanding of were always scary. The fact that those inexplicable Chinese divinations from Earth could produce effects here, the strange transmigration in his sleep, the mysterious murmurings that almost drove him crazy during the ritual, and the mysterious and trippy gray world whose significance he had no idea of made Klein shiver in the hot weather of June. The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest fear is the fear of the unknown. He recalled this saying as he was experiencing the fear of the unknown acutely. There was in him an unprecedented and irresistible urge to make contact with the mysterious domain, to learn more, and to explore the unknown. There was also a contradicting escape mentality within him, compelling him to pretend nothing had happened. Intense sunlight shone through the window onto the desk. It was as if there were grains of gold sprinkled on the desk. Klein gazed at the desk, feeling as though he had come into contact with warmth and hope. He relaxed slightly, and a strong sense of fatigue washed over him. His eyelids were as heavy as lead as they kept closing themselves. It must have been the combined effect of the sleepless night and the tiring encounter. Klein shook his head and pushed himself up with the aid of the desk. He stumbled towards the double-decked bed, completely disregarding the rye bread placed at the four corners of the room. He fell asleep immediately after he lay down. Groan! Groan! Klein was woken up by hunger pangs. When he opened his eyes, he felt rejuvenated. There's still a slight headache. He rubbed his temples and sat up. He was so hungry that he could eat a horse. He returned to the desk while straightening his shirt. He picked up the silver vine-leaf pocket watch. Pa! The pocket watch's lid sprang open, and the second hand was ticking. 12:30. I slept for 3 hours. Klein put the pocket watch back into his linen shirt pocket while swallowing. In the northern continent, there were 24 hours in a day, 60 minutes in an hour, and 60 seconds in a minute. Whether each second passed at the same rate here compared to Earth was unknown to Klein. At this moment, he could not even think of terms such as mysticism, rituals, or the grayish world. His mind was occupied by one thing: food. He would leave the thinking to after his meals. Only then could he work. Klein picked up the loaves of rye bread from the four corners and wiped off the minute specks of dust on it without any hesitation. He planned on making one of them his lunch. He decided to dig into the offerings because he only had 5 pence with him, and there was a tradition of eating the offerings back in his hometown. After all, there was not any observable change to the bread. It was better to be frugal. Of course, the memory and habits left behind by the original Klein had also played a role. It was a huge waste to use the expensive gas only to light up the room, so Klein took out a furnace and boiled water with it after adding some coal. He paced around as he waited. Anyone would choke eating those loaves of rye bread without water. Yikes. Life with meat only for dinner is going to be dreadful. No, wait. This is already an exception. Melissa would only allow our meals to have meat twice a week if not for my upcoming interview, Klein thought, as he looked around, hungry. He had nothing better to do. His eyes seemed to turn avaricious when he set his eyes on the pound of mutton in the cupboard. No. I need to wait for Melissa to eat it together, Klein thought as he shook his head and rejected the idea of cooking half of it right now. Although he often ate outside, he had still developed some basic culinary skills, owing to his living in a big city alone. His dishes were not delicious, but they were at least edible. Klein turned his body around so that the mutton would not seduce him. Then he suddenly realized that he had also bought peas and potatoes in the morning. Potatoes! Klein immediately had an idea. He quickly turned back to the cupboard and took out 2 potatoes from a tiny pile of them. He first cleaned the potatoes in the public bathroom and then added them into a pot so they were boiled together with the water. After a while, he sprinkled into the water some yellow coarse salt from the spices container he found inside the cupboard. He waited patiently for a few minutes before lifting the pot and pouring the soup into a few cups and a bowl. He took out the potatoes with a fork and placed them on the desk at the end. He blew at the potato as he peeled it bit by bit. The fragrance of boiled potato diffused through the air. It smelled very appetizing. He salivated crazily. The heat could not deter him any longer. Klein took a bite despite having the potato only half peeled. How fragrant! It had a powdery texture and tasted sweet as he chewed. He was instantly filled with emotions, and he wolfed down the 2 potatoes. He even ate some of the skin. Then he held up the bowl and enjoyed the soup. The pinch of salt in water proved to be thirst-quenching. I really enjoyed eating potatoes this way when I was young, a filled Klein exclaimed in his head. Meanwhile, he tore off a small piece of bread and dipped it into the soup to eat it softened. Perhaps the ritual was too tiring. Klein ate 2 loaves of bread, which amounted to a whole pound. Klein felt he was finally rejuvenated. He enjoyed the joy of life after he drank the soup before tidying up. Then, he took in the lustrous sunshine happily. He sat back at the desk and began planning.